So I was part of the 2025 GMTK Gamejam, and during it I created this game that you see before you. It's called Game of Greed, and it was made in 4 days. The gist of the game is that you walk your pawn around a board where you put out different tiles that earn you money to pass the round. And if you manage to earn enough money in the 4th rows you have to pass the round, then you're able to enter the shop and buy more tiles to upgrade your board and buy items to upgrade your tiles so that you can earn more money and pass more rounds, and on and on and on. The theme of the jam was loop, so my interpretation was this pawn that uses the dice throw to walk around the board, which is just a big loop. So the general idea of the game is, of course, a sort of combination between Balatro and a classic game of Monopoly or other board games like it. Most of the game was very well planned out. I was actually very happy with the planning. And my goal the whole time was to have a sort of playable game by Friday, when the jam started on a Wednesday and ended on a Sunday. And I really managed to do that, and was actually very happy with the planning throughout the whole game. And I planned it using Milanote, as you can see. So in the first hours of the jam, this is what the game looked like. It had the dice functionality and the basic placing of tiles. However, in the beginning I made it so that where you land is where you were able to pick one of 3 tiles from your quote-unquote deck and could place those there basically. You also had the functionality of choosing which dice you wanted to throw, and a basic event system so that when you land on a tile it waits before doing the next event to do whatever you're actively doing right now. It was very important that this was one of the first things that I built so that I could build everything else on top of the event system, so that everything was implemented as events and would be done in the right order during playtime. This was expanded upon, and using some temporary graphics from Monopoly, I started implementing the basic tiles. So here I've implemented the first basic tile, which is the road, which earns you money equal to other tiles of the same color on the same street. And here I'm basically starting to flesh out the idea of what the actual gameplay would look like. Here I've started to implement some of the basic items, which I thought were really necessary to add some depth, as well as the second tile sort, which was the railroad. Now I changed how railroads work to make them more basic later on, when I've also implemented the new board system. But here you can see a basic sort of gameplay loop starting to form, where you're actively upgrading your board to earn more and more money. There are no losing or winning conditions yet, but those come later. At the start of day 2 is when I realized that the board system I have really won't work. It's not fun to work with, and there aren't a lot of interesting game design decisions being made during gameplay. So I completely scrap it and make it out of UI elements instead. World space UI still, so it feels like an actual 3D board game. However, doing this made it a lot more interesting. Now when you place tiles, it actually grows the street, and so there are no empty tiles left. And this means that when you place tiles, you of course get a better board overall, but also there are more tiles on it, so it takes longer to walk around the whole board to get to maybe the better tiles. So it really becomes a trade-off of, do you place it because it's a good tile, or do you maybe hold off because you have even better tiles that you want to be able to get to on a lesser dice throw. This also enabled much more interesting tiles, because now everything was in easily identifiable streets that could influence the other tiles, and things that were next to each other could easily be found and such. So this took a long time to implement, wasn't that easy, and had a bunch of issues. And on top of that, I also now needed to add a store, since you were actually placing out the tile and not just choosing tile when you landed on an empty one. So the store and the new tile system took most of day 2, which was a Thursday, and also took some of the Friday, but the game was a lot better for it. And then at the end of the Friday, I started adding what would actually make this a playable game. So I did some small polishing touches, such as of course removing the AI art, as that was not allowed, and made my own art instead. I'm not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but it did its work. And of course making the store actually usable, having a reroll button, adding the goals visually so that you could actually pass the rounds, and there were win states and lose states for those kinds of things, and just generally making sure that there was an actual game loop so that I could start sending this to testers and get some feedback for the game so I could start improving it from a gameplay perspective as well. And so this was the first build that was actually sent to playtesters. It was very simple still, but it had all of the basic elements that I wanted. So you can walk around the board. When you pass a round, you get the shop, and you can place things from the shop. And so here we can see some of the different sort of tiles you can place, and I decided here that it's a lot more fun if you can only place where your pawn has actually landed. Now, unfortunately, I didn't communicate this well enough and got some feedback that this was one of the things that I could improve on. It did get better, but I didn't come up with a great solution until after the jam was finished. Whilst making all the menus for this game also, I added this fun flip animation so that when you start a new game or when you pause and quit your game, it's basically just a lot more fun and makes the whole game feel like it's an actual board game. During this time I was waiting for playtesters, so I basically just started to add a bunch of different polish. I added these icons to make the text and what was going on the screen a lot clearer, and also made some things like the tooltips and general look of the tiles and such a lot better. At this point I got a bunch of feedback, and what was abundantly clear was that the game needed a tutorial. So I added a tutorial, which is basically just this little pop-up that pauses your game and tells you what to do when you actually need to do it. So for example, when your pawn is moving along, it tells you why it's doing that and how you're scoring and how to clear the rounds, etc. And also, of course, that when the shop opens, it tells you what to do in the shop, and when you do something confusing like buy a tile, it tells you how to actually place that tile. Here is also when we added the parks, which increase their own value, and this is the third and final basic sort of tile that we have in the game, and these together actually made the game a lot easier for beginners, as they're a very beginner friendly strat, and that was important as I wanted as many people as possible to actually be able to clear the rounds and get some sort of pride in their playthrough of the game. At this point, I also added the music that you're currently hearing. Now, I am not a musician by any stretch of the imagination. I like to do some really stupid drum and bass remixes. As you can hear. But I was able to actually make something that I thought fit the game quite well, and it took me about 3 hours. Since I already had access to Ableton and Splice and such, I was able to find some things that harmonized very well and went well together. So first I found these cool drums that were really jazzy, and that was exactly what I was looking for. And so I paired that with this piano. And them together just sounded really good, like even by themselves. So then I just wanted that, you know, thing that makes it unique, so I added a saxophone that I found. Unfortunately, it's not me playing. I thought, wish I was this good. I also found these really cool string things that had some really nice texture. And so then it was just adding enough variation throughout the track to make it not feel like it was constantly looping. And a big part of that was chopping up the pianos in this section so that I could actually let the strings through and let them have their own moment. Basically, I've just taken most of the piano away, so it's just the basic chords. And so then for the final version of the game, what was really needed was a bunch of polish, a bunch of small sound effects that really made it feel alive and like something was happening there. For example, this money ticker when you clear a round really added some really necessary dopamine when you actually clear a round and make it feel satisfying that you've done so. And small tweaks like making text red when you can't buy it, adding the glowing outline to the dice to make it so that you actually know when they're selected and not. Before you were just changing the color, and a lot of people didn't realize that they actually had them selected. Same thing goes for the items, so they didn't really realize that they could drag them, so I made them highlighted like this, so that was much more obvious. And in general, there were just a bunch of tweaks and adding a few tiles to make the game more fun and more balanced and rewarding. And of course, in general, I just made the game a whole lot prettier, adding a bunch of these lights and a bunch of these coins scattered around everywhere. I added another custom box where your items go that looks like another part of the sort of game set, as well as a paper that could be your rule paper or whatever. And so for this effort, I placed 140th in enjoyment and 205th in audio and 262nd in creativity. And I was super duper happy with these scores. Very surprised over the audio score, as like I said, I'm definitely not a musician and most of the SFX were from opengamesounds.org. But what was really fun was all of the super cool feedback that I got from a lot of other people who have played. And I tried to respond to as many of them as possible and really take in the feedback, and I was writing it all down. And so using all of that feedback, I started writing down all of the post-jam ideas and scope creep things that I wanted to do. And when the jam had ended, I started adding these in. So for example, a game speed toggle so that you could make the game go faster. I added a lot harder difficulties as people thought that maybe it was too easy and they wanted a bigger challenge. I also made the things in shop actually highlight when you're hovering over them, so you know what you can buy and click. I made the tooltips and tutorial actually scale and appear a lot faster. And when you're dragging, for example, an item, it highlights where you can actually place it. And the same thing, of course, goes for the tiles. The streets where you can place them are now highlighted, and it sort of grays out the what I call the ghost tiles, so you know where you're actually placing it. And I also added this very requested infinite button where you can basically keep playing even from the last round. And overall, I'm just so happy with this whole project and how it turned out. This is the first game jam I do by myself. It's also the first one in 6 years, I believe, and my first one in Unity. So regarding how many firsts it were, I really do think this is the best game I've ever made. And a lot of that comes down to what I think was a great idea to begin with, as well as actually some great planning, because I never really felt super duper stressed during the development of this game and felt like I had a complete product after almost day 3. But of course, became a lot better during the last day, and also became even better after the jam once I was able to implement a bunch of people's feedback. Since then, I've actually remade the entire tile system, or more exactly the effect system. Now all of the effects are modular, so I just create something like a money effect, and then I can basically make a money per train asset that takes in a train counter to multiply whatever the base value of money is. And then I can add a description that actually updates during playtime as the tile's value is increased. And that is also something that a lot of people gave as feedback, that it should have been part of the game during the jam. So chances are I'll keep on working on this game and even release it as a full product. Right now I do not know. It would totally depend on how many people wanted that to be done, as I really do not have a lot of time right now. But I really do enjoy working on it and also enjoy actually playing it. So I hope that other people are as excited about it as I am, and then who knows, maybe we'll do something more with it. Until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and please do leave a like and possibly even a comment so that more people can see my amazing game, right? Thanks a bunch.